Hi there, I'm Jeff Hampton with the STR Law Guys. Thanks for joining us here today. On this video, I want to talk to you today about limited liability companies. Now, many times when maybe you're a short-term rental investor and you're trying to figure out, how do I protect my assets? Does an LLC make sense for me? By the way, if you wait around to the end of this video, I'll also give you a free ebook, The Ultimate Guide to Your Short-Term Rental Insurance Protection. All right, we'll make that available to you at the end of the video. Now let's talk about LLCs. People call them LLCs. I always kind of laugh when people say that's a limited liability corporation. No, that's not what it is. It's a limited liability company. And we're going to talk about that here for a minute, because when considering asset protection strategies that are effective for your short-term rental and other types of real estate investing, LLCs are a common topic that come up. And here's one of the things you need to be aware of. First, we need to designate what type of assets you have. Do you have a no-risk asset, a low-risk asset, or high-risk assets? As an example of that, maybe a no-risk asset could include your personal residence. For instance, if you live in a favorable state when it comes to homestead exemptions, like maybe Texas, as one example of those, is you're not going to have to worry too much about protecting your homestead and your home in that situation because of those homestead exemptions. There are other things that are involved as well. Your retirement accounts can be protected under ERISA. But then you start talking about lower risk assets. Maybe there you're talking about certain brokerage accounts, retirement accounts, and then you get to high-risk assets. And this is what we're here talking about, you as a short-term rental investor, is we're talking about short-term rentals. We're talking about long-term rentals. We're talking about maybe multifamily investing. When you're talking about assets, real estate assets that are being used to generate income for you, but yet other people are having access to them, that is a high-risk asset. Now, the question is not whether or not an LLC is an effective tool. It absolutely can be. The real question, though, is how is that tool being used in your asset protection strategy? And you want to make sure that it's being incorporated properly. Now, the protection provided, how do you get a protection actually provided by a limited liability company? LLCs provide you protection through what is called charging order protection, okay? Now, essentially what that means is that your attorney, the charging orders are drafted by your lawyer whenever you establish your LLC, and it helps to provide separation between you and your liability individually and the actual business of the LLC that's being conducted. If the charging orders are drafted properly, then they will help to limit any type of damages that could be inflicted by a creditor or maybe a lawsuit that could come up. And I always think about this with short-term rentals. What if there's some type of premises liability issue? What if someone falls and breaks their leg? What if someone has a swimming accident or a pool accident that takes place? So, and one of those examples I always share when I have a conversation with someone about this. Let's say you have a short-term rental property on a lake. Someone dives into the lake and they end up injuring themselves seriously. And now you're talking about a potentially costly lawsuit. If you do not have your properties in the right entity, if it's not set up the correct way, you could end up having yourself personally liable as the subject of that lawsuit. So here's the point. Strategy matters, okay? Strategy matters. And as a general rule, when drafting the LLC as part of your short-term rental asset protection strategy, it's important to know how to use that legal entity. Speaking of an LLC, some attorneys will draft LLCs, and here's a crazy thing that happens on occasion. They'll draft an LLC and they'll put all of that client's properties into a single LLC. Well, that is a very risky proposition. If you put all of your short-term rentals in a single LLC, you're putting yourself at significant risk. Think about this. What if you're sued? What if someone sues you from an event that takes place on one of your properties? They're going to sue your LLC. Your entire LLC, all those properties in one entity are at risk during a lawsuit. If you lose that lawsuit, if there's a judgment that comes about it, what's going to end up happening is they're going to be able to take all of the assets within that LLC. So as a general rule, it's more effective to place each individual short-term rental into their unique LLC, okay? It provides individual protection for each separate property, and it separates that possible liability from every other short-term rental that you might own, okay? Now, does it matter which state you set up your LLC? And I'm gonna give you some common question and answers here that come my way when it comes to this. And many people believe that you can achieve what I've heard some people refer to it as asset protection nirvana, simply by setting up an LLC in the right state. Now, unfortunately, that's just not true. And a frequent practice that I find is Many people may have a property, let's say you have a property in Texas, but they want to set up a LLC in a separate state because they believe that state's favorable rules or favorable laws will give them protection in the state that they're in. And for example, one of the things that we find is people really love, and it is true, Wyoming LLC law, Nevada, Delaware. You'll find many investors like to use those states because those states have favorable laws written to protect people that put their properties in an LLC. The problem here's the problem. Let me give you an example. What if you're short-term rental, and I'm right there with you. I have short-term rentals myself. What if I have a short-term rental in Texas, but I set up a Wyoming LLC? Now here's the question. If I get sued for something that happens in Texas, let's say something happens at a short-term rental in Texas, are you going to be able to claim protection from Wyoming laws in Texas? In other words, can you walk into a Texas courtroom if you get sued and say, Judge, I really want you to apply Wyoming law because I like that law better than I like the law in Texas? It doesn't work that way. The reality of it is you cannot go chasing favorable laws, protections in different states. It just doesn't work that way. So the reality of it is if I get called into in front of a judge in a Texas court, the Texas judge is going to apply Texas law, not Wyoming law. So we like to, as a general rule, to warn people, don't go chasing after favorable state charging order protection. You need to make sure you understand you can't go borrow or take favorable state laws and apply them to another state. Okay, it doesn't work that way under the U.S. legal system. Okay, now in summary, here's the point. We don't chase those laws. We set them up. That's not where you're getting your primary protection from. Now, second question, can I set up an LLC that makes me anonymous? Can basically I be invisible and protected from a lawsuit? This is a common question and misconception that many investors have. They think they get a short-term rental, they set it up, they can throw it into a Wyoming LLC, and now that it's in a Wyoming LLC, they're completely immune from a lawsuit. Now let's talk a little bit about Wyoming LLCs because in the right place, they're very useful. But many people believe a Wyoming LLC will render them invisible to a lawsuit because people don't see their personal name on that lawsuit. But it would be a mistake. This is critical. Understand the difference between privacy and anonymity. Okay? Anonymity means no one can ever find you. Privacy means your name's not on all of it. Okay? It's more difficult. You become a smaller target. Here's how it works. I'll just give you an example. Let's pretend you have been sued for negligence because of an accident that's taken place on a rental property, maybe an Airbnb or a VRBO that you own, and let's hypothetically say it's in Florida. You've decided you set up a Wyoming LLC in the belief that you'll be anonymous from a predatory attack by a lawyer. But if an attorney sues you, here's how it works. This is why this is so important you understand. If you get sued, the lawyer is going to first file a lawsuit. You're going to actually be served. Your registered agent will be served. That registered agent's going to reach out to you and say, hey, you got sued. You're going to have to show up to court. Guess what's going to happen next? You show up to court. You're going to be put on the witness stand. And then an attorney, that plaintiff's attorney, is going to make you swear under oath who you are and what connection you have to the LLC. Okay? So even though it may be private, it doesn't mean it's necessarily anonymous. It doesn't mean that you're invisible. There is no such thing as being invisible. So there is no anonymity. The moment you get hauled up in court, you're put up there on that witness stand and you have been put under oath to talk about why you're here and how you're tied over to the LLC. So that's really important. Finally, let's talk about this. What are the limitations? LLCs have their place. But what are the limitations of an LLC for asset protection? Now, number one, first, I always ask people this. Do you know if your short-term rental LLC, if you've set up one, do you know if your short-term rental LLC was set up as a disregarded entity? Now, usually when I ask that question, I just get a lot of people look back at me and say, what? A disregarded what? And so the reason why I'm saying that is beware the disregarded entity when it comes to asset protection. Now listen, it's a good thing to have a disregarded entity for tax purposes. From a tax perspective, your CPA likes that. In fact, most CPAs, if your CPA set up your LLC, they probably set it up as a disregarded entity because it allows the taxes to flow through to your personal return. It makes it less complicated. It makes it easier, and you can still take advantage of many of the tax benefits. The problem is this. If you are a disregarded entity for asset protection purposes, it makes it easier for a plaintiff's lawyer or or other creditor to attack your situation, okay? And one of the things that I say on this is one of the areas that you can really identify for yourself is to ask yourself, did my LLC get set up as a single member LLC? Am I the only person on that LLC? If so, I'm going to be treated as a disregarded entity. Okay. Now let's talk about that. Being labeled a disregarded entity is not altogether a bad thing if your LLC is in the right place in your asset protection strategy and the decisions that you make in terms of how you set up your asset protection. The problem is, remember why this matters. What matters is what's going to happen when you go to court. If you get sued and you get hauled into court, there is plenty of case law out there where many judges will pierce right through that corporate veil, right through that company veil to get into the asset and then over into the individual's personal funds that they have, your net worth. And so what we care about is whether or not that LLC is going to be effective in and of itself. Okay. So that's number one. Did you have a disregarded entity? Beware if you did. Number two, what happens if you don't follow the company requirements for an LLC? And I say whether it's company or corporate requirements for that. What do I mean by that? If you set up an LLC, let me ask you this. Did you hold an annual meeting? Did you keep the minutes? Here's the other thing. When you buy something, did you ever commingle funds from one LLC to another LLC? I'll give you a great example of this. And I've had this happen to me many times. What if you're sitting in Costco? You look over and you say, hey, that would look perfect over at my short-term rental. I need to buy that, but oh, I don't have the right credit card for that. I'll just buy it on my personal card. I'll reimburse myself later from the company card. Well, you know what you've just done? You've just commingled funds. And one of the things an attacking attorney will do is look to see, did you actually treat this as a legitimate business, right? Did you actually make sure that you held an annual meeting? Did you keep the minutes? Did you ever commingle funds? Because if you did commingle funds and you didn't keep those things segregated, it makes it much easier for an attacking attorney to come in and go right through that LLC. Okay, and you lose some of that protection. So finally, what role does an LLC have in a short-term rental protection strategy? Here's the thing. General rule, every situation is unique, but we recommend that every individual short-term rental be placed in their own unique LLC because it provides that separation from each property and it allows you to have that protection. Now, the problem is people say, but what about all these negatives? What about all the bad things that you talked about regarding an LLC? Well, that's why we then, and you'll see some of the other videos that we have, and I encourage you to go watch them. We recommend you set up a holding company of a limited partnership. That limited partnership, it will then allow you not to have to fall prey to some of the limitations that exist for only using an LLC for asset protection. I encourage you to go watch that video. We tie it all together for you on that video. But it's really important to understand this. LLCs are good. They're very effective, but they play their role. They help establish a layer of protection, but it's only that first layer of protection. So I encourage you, watch the rest of our videos. By the way, I know I promised you a free ebook, The Ultimate Guide to Your Short-Term Rental Insurance. And if you'll click through down into the link and give us your email address, we'll be happy to send that right over to you. This ebook establishes all that you need to know in setting up your insurance to make sure that you're protected for your short-term rental. Thanks for joining us here today, and I look forward to seeing you on our next video series.